Hello, students. Good morning to you all. It's a pleasure always coming your way. And this morning, I would want us to continue with our lessons where we left off. I think the last time we met, or the last lesson we had, we thought about how to, the steps in instructional design, And I mentioned that there were 6 basic steps in instructional design, 6 basic steps. These steps are as follows. 1, analyze your learners and the learning context. 2, define your learning outcomes. 3, structure the learning content. 4, select the learning materials or resources. 5, design the learning activities. And then 6, determine the modes of assessment. Definitely, these steps guide us when we want to design an instruction. The first step, for instance, is to analyze your learners and the context in which the learning is supposed to take place. We cannot have a lesson that is designed without thinking of the particular group of learners that are supposed to partake in that learning activity. It is for this reason that we need to analyze our learners. Coupled with this is the fact that not every group of learners are the same. So we cannot have one size fits all kind of design for every lesson. Secondly, for each lesson that we want to teach, we need to have an outcome that we seek that after the lesson, our learners would be able to acquire or exhibit. And this ought to be defined right from the beginning, so that as you are making progress, you know that you are making progress in line with a particular objective. 3, for you to be able to achieve your objectives or your learning outcomes, there is the need for you to structure the content you are teaching so that it focuses on, or its energy is directed towards those outcomes that you want to achieve. You structure your learning content in such a way that it moves the instructional period towards achievement of those learning outcomes. It helps in the sense that you do not find yourself, whenever there is the excitement in the lesson, in the delivery of the lesson, to move away from what you would have wanted to achieve. Next, each lesson that we teach or each lesson that we design for the purposes of teaching may have peculiar material needs or resources that we need. So you may have to think about these and then select the appropriate materials and the appropriate resources that would make the delivery of that lesson a reality, a success. Then after you have selected your materials, you go ahead to design the various activities that those materials, together with the content, are going to be used for. You design your learning activities in such a way that at the end of the day, the lesson can follow those activities in order to achieve your outcome. Finally, whenever you are done with your activities, definitely you will need to determine how the assessment of your students is going to be made. What form of assessment would you want? What mode of assessment would you like to follow as an instructional designer? These are the basic steps of an instructional design. And in the performance of each step, an instructional designer seeks to answer the following basic questions. 1, who are my learners? What do they already know? How best do they learn? What do we want our learners to learn? Now, who are my learners is a way of analyzing your learners. What do they want to learn and why talks about your objectives, your targets. How do we structure the learning to achieve our learning objectives? What learning resources are most appropriate, effective, and available? These are very important because sometimes you may think of a learning resource as being appropriate, but it may not be available. So we think about the ones that are appropriate, the ones that are effective, the ones that are available, those that we can get to use for every lesson at every point in time. What strategies then do we want to use to ensure that we have an effective learning taking place? What kind of activities would we want our learners to be engaged in so that we can achieve our learning objectives? Once we think about this, we take the learners through these activities and we are good to go. Finally, how do we know whether the learners are learning or have learned what they're supposed to learn? How do we assess learning? And you'd have seen that these questions throw more light on the 6 steps I spoke about earlier. We have learned that instructional design is a systematic process. It enables an educator to identify the performance problem, determine the goals and objectives, define the learners and their needs, then develop strategies to meet those needs and goals, after which an assessment of learning outcomes is done. Finally, we evaluate if goals, objectives, and needs are met. According to Branch and Merrill, 2002, there are characteristics that should be present in all instructional design models. 1, the instructional design is learner-centered. The learner and his or her performance are the focal point. 2, instructional design is goal-oriented. In other words, well-defined goals are essential. Instructional design focuses on real-world experience. It helps learners to perform behavior that will be expected of them in the real world. Instructional design focuses on outcomes that can be measured in a reliable and a valid way. Creating valid and reliable measurement instruments is essential. Instructional design is empirical in the sense that data is at the heart of the process. Instructional design typically is a team effort. This process usually involves teamwork. Some instructional design models that come to mind are as follows. We have the ADDI model of instructional design. The ADDI model is used by instructional designers in training developers. It is composed of 5 different phases. These different phases give it its name, the ADDI model. The A stands for analysis. The D stands for design. The other D stands for development. The I is for implementation. And then the E for evaluation. This model attempts to save time and money by catching problems whilst they are still easy to fix. When we take the ADDI model, the analysis stage explores the way things are and the way things should be. What is the situation we have observed currently? What is the desired situation that should be currently? As you think along these lines, and you are able to identify the gap that exists in between what the situation is and what it ought to be, you are conducting an analysis. After having identified your gap, we move on to the design phase. If the analysis identified a performance gap, the design phase will outline the performance objectives. In the design stage, you will actually put in place mechanisms that will enhance performance such that the gap between what ought to be and what is can easily be achieved. After designing the situational steps to achieve that difference between the gaps, you go ahead to use the information you have gathered in the analysis and the design stage to create or develop a lesson, an instruction. So the performance solution is created at the develop stage or phase. At the develop phase, we actually put together our knowledge of the analysis and then the design phases to create the desired instruction in a way that will solve the problem that we have come across in the analysis stage. Having created the instructional design, we need to put it into action. And that is where the implement or implementation stage comes in. At the implementation stage, we put into practice that which we have developed. There is an actual enactment or use of the instructional design in the classroom. So the design which has been developed is now implemented. After the implementation, we will now go to the next phase, which is the evaluate phase. The evaluate phase is the stage where there is a measurement of how well the performance solution achieved its objectives. We will find out whether we have been able to reduce the gap or not. If we are able to reduce the gap, we move on. If we are unable to reduce the gap, we find out why we were unsuccessful, and then we begin, and that will begin a different level of analysis. For this reason, the ADDI model is thought of as being cyclical. The ADDI model is thought of as being cyclical. So as I said, we have the analysis period, we have the design phase, we have the development phase, we have the implementation phase, then we have the evaluation phase. I'll be sharing these slides with you today after this instruction. However, there are other useful models which are equally helpful for designing instructional materials. The ADDI model is not the only model that can be used for designing instructional materials. One such model is the dig and carry model. It starts from identifying instructional goals and moves with writing of performance of objectives, development of a criterion reference test, development of the instructional strategy, development and selection of instructional materials, and then you move on to develop and conduct formative evaluation, then develop and conduct your summative evaluation, identifying entry behaviors, and moving on to the conduct of instructional analysis and revision of the instruction. It looks a little cumbersome, seeks to be a straightforward or a linear form of design. What more can you find about the dig and carry model? Share this with me in the comments section. Then we have the Kemp Instructional Design Model. The Kemp Instructional Design Model has 9 core elements. 9 core elements. And I would love for us to have a discussion on the 9 core elements of the Kemp Instructional Design Model. Specifically, I would love for you to compare the Kemp Instructional Design Model with the dig and carry model as against the ADDI model. And let's have that discussion on the dashboard of the Google Classroom. Having said that, I would love for us to be reminded of our first internal assessment exercise, which is also posted on the Google Classroom platform. Please make time to put in your responses and submit your assignment. And on that note, I'll end today's lesson. Thank you very much for coming. Once again, I remain the humble servant, Dr. Prince Eden Jakwasu. Thank you.